Sir Alex Younger, welcome. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk to you here at the Cipher Brief. It's nice to have you on the program.
Thank you.
I thought we'd start out just by kind of doing a quick tour around the world. No big deal. It's such an incredibly complicated time. Not only complicated by what's happening with China, with Russia, with Europe, and now with a new incoming U.S. president in January. Alliances are more complicated, I think, than they've been. I mean, when you sit back, I know you do a lot of consulting now as well, now that you've retired. When you sit back and you look at the world, how do you even start to describe some of the challenges and then prioritize those challenges for people who really are trying to do a better job of navigating it all?
I think this is normal. So I think the problem that we have is our generation was brought up in an unusual time, almost an aberration, when the US was the unipolar power and it had both the willingness and the ability to police the system it had created. I might add, a huge benefit to the United States, but also, of course, huge benefit to its allies. And at that time, too, it was a dominant power economically. It was able to make the rules make the prices across the globe. And at least from our perspective, I don't think it was the same if you were outside that system. From our perspective, it was a remarkably stable time, and we kind of convinced ourselves that history had ended and the rules had changed. But my privilege, the only privilege I have as a covert operator, is in my world, it was not like that at all. And in my world, no one had got the memo about the end of history. Indeed, it was all about strong men and the unrestrained pursuit of interest, even if they pretended it was different. So this for me is kind of what it's always been like, and this degree of ideological competition kind of represents what the world is. But the kind of new reality is power is much more dispersed. So the US remains the prodigious power. You underestimate the US at your peril, but its capacity to make the price across the globe, that's gone. So we're all in just a fundamentally more complex environment, and this would be very familiar to people who would have lived on the world before this kind of unipolar moment.
Yeah, I wonder then. I mean, it's a fantastic point. And actually, the idea that the US's time is over is a narrative being pushed by China, by Russia, by all of these other countries that have not taken a side, if you will, in the Ukraine war, for example. How do you see this moment in history, and how do you see the best case scenario for coming out of this?
So I think there is a thing that the US needs to confront here. I'm a committed Atlanticist. I've literally served shoulder to shoulder with my US compatriots. There are people all over the world who are alive because of what the US agencies have done. I bow to no one in my admiration for the US. But there's a central thing about the world now, which is that it is multipolar. Power is dispersed, and it's much more chaotic. The unipolar moment is over, and I think the last place that's really landed is Washington. I think that a foreign policy to be successful now needs to recognize that a central fact. It needs to be much more agile and instrumental, and the playbook doesn't really feel like it's been updated. Now it's about to be radically updated. But I think in Donald Trump's prescription, and by the way, I've dealt with him quite extensively in his last period as president, as is often the case with people like Donald Trump. I think the diagnosis is pretty good, but the prescription is often not what we need.
So you think some of what he would like to do or setting out to do is not necessarily bad, maybe offering a good, needed disruption to the system?
He knows something. So I think he understands. Well, no. So we are in a multipolar world, and a corollary of that is that inequality between states has been replaced by inequality within states, and people in developed democracies just feel they're getting the wrong end of the deal, and it's blamed on globalization. Although I think technology's got a very large part to play here. And there's a sense that the deal's gone wrong and the US is not a beneficiary of the system it's created. And Trump did us all a massive favor. He really gave, for instance, the Europeans a kicking on their free riding and unwillingness to spend on their own defense. that was a good move. And he called out China. That was a good move. I'm actually broadly with him on Iran. But my problem is that what do dictators and autocrats really fear about us? And the answer is our alliances. What's the thing that we can do that they can't do? Alliances. What's the thing Xi Jinping complains about the whole time? Being ganged up on. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, for all of the prodigious power that the United States possesses, it's its capacity for teamwork and partnership that has made it so dominant. And in denigrating that bit, I think he's dead wrong. So I think he's done some important stuff. As I say, he called out China. He called out defense spending. I think the Abraham Accords are an excellent piece of work, and I hope he's going to build on them. But on the alliance thing, we have got to persuade our most important ally that alliances are worth it. And if we fail, it's a huge win for dictators. Because what is the foreign policy or the guiding philosophy of Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin? It's that Russia or China should be allowed to pursue their interests unfettered by other people or other states. And honestly, to a foreigner, America First sounds a bit like that too.
That's understandable. I've been a non-American, but I definitely understand that. Let me ask you, there's been a lot of speculation here about just how President-elect Trump is planning to end the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And his seemingly high level of respect for Vladimir Putin, which is quite different than what the intelligence community in the U.S., for example, assesses. I wonder what you think about that, and then kind of layering in what you mentioned about his pressure on NATO and NATO countries now stepping up, the EU having a different view, perhaps, on defending itself. How is all this coming together for you?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think that the difference in the Middle East and Ukraine is that I think Trump has a relatively well-developed plan for the Middle East, which is a remarkable thing to say given the intractable nature of the problems that we face there. I actually don't think he has a well-developed plan for Ukraine other than an instinct that you can do a deal with Putin and make this go away. I think we need to be open-minded about this. I mean, set pride apart, our policy hitherto hasn't worked particularly well. Putin thinks that he is winning and there's no end of the war in sight. So I don't think anyone should denigrate a sincere attempt to end this war. But it should be one that aims at a sustainable solution. And I've got a very strong view about what a sustainable solution is and what it isn't. And I think our job now as friends of the United States and members of an alliance, of course, friends and very active supporters of Ukraine, is to maintain that crucial distinction. And by the way, the Ukrainians themselves wouldn't agree with what I'm about to say, because they are in a slightly different position. And I understand that and I respect it. And we've got to all be extraordinarily conscious of the sacrifice that they have made. But to my mind, it is in the West's interest that Putin is seen to have failed. And if that is not the case, then he will be emboldened and do it again, and peace will not be sustainable. What is failure for Putin? Well, he's pretty well told us what success is, and it's not about territory, it's about sovereignty. He has said that Ukraine's continued existence as a country, let alone a Western-leaning country, is an unacceptable threat to Russia. And his peace terms, where he thinks he's winning, are going to be very, very clear. One, of course, is territory. But two is that Ukraine signs itself into non-existence in foreign policy and constitutional terms. And the problem with that is if we allow that second bit to happen, the land for peace deal won't stick. Because we've done this before. We did the Minsk Accords. We gave him what he wanted. But we had no mechanism to allow the residual Ukraine to stand up and defend itself. So that is the thing for me. It's what I would be saying to the president-elect is this is going to be a land deal. Trump's a real estate guy. He's very focused on this. And in a sense, that's the easy bit, which is not to denigrate the experience, the terrible experience that people living behind the lines will have. But if we allow Putin to dominate us into signing away Ukraine's right to defend itself, then I can assure you that is not a stable solution. Then, for whatever reason, the land swap won't be deemed to be complete. It will erode and be encroached. and we won't have a leg to stand on.
It would be difficult, though, to imagine Donald Trump allowing someone to come into Trump Tower in New York and take over a level and say, "This now belongs to me," and as a deal, I'm going to just give it to you. I don't think anyone's explained it.
No,
Maybe you can share it.
I think this is the problem for us as Europeans. I mean, we need to recognize that President Trump's priorities, I think, lie in tariffs and migration and a set of domestic issues in the United States. This is probably quite a long way down his list. But of course, over here, it feels strong. And by the way, a key point in all of this, and this is much bigger than Trump, is that this is going to be owned by Europe. You know, it's coming Europe's way. So there's a parallel dynamic here, which is Europe needs to understand not only that it owns this, but that it can own it. It has an economy 10 times the size of Russia, for heaven's sake. And the Russian army has proved to be mediocre at best. We just have to organize for success.
I want to dig in on that because I also want to know if part of the sustainable solution, in your mind, means security guarantees and that Ukraine becomes part of NATO.
Mm.
How can Europe kind of step up and lead in this environment today?
So I think that we need to be realistic. I mean, it would be theoretically marvelous to see Ukraine in NATO. I don't think it's going to happen. That isn't to say that I don't want it to happen, but what's the point in talking about something that is manifestly theoretical? What Ukraine needs is to be supported to be an independent country, to be supported in the development of its military industrial complex, a bit like the relationship between Israel and the United States, to receive an unstinting and generous underpinning to its military capabilities. That seems to me a very practical way of holding Russia a threat, because the Ukrainians have been remarkably capable of doing that. I think if we elevate this to a conversation about whether European families should send European children to serve on the territory of Ukraine, it's going to get very binary very quickly, and I don't think we have helped anybody.
I think it's fascinating what has happened there. I mean, the Cipher Brief has been there 6 times since the invasion, February 2022. And you mentioned military industrial sort of environment there. I mean, the innovation that's been happening in the defense space is, I think, unexpected on everyone's radar, and it's really been almost game changing. How do you see that continuing to develop, and how important do you think that is?
I think I don't want to drink the Kool-Aid on tech. You know, fundamentally, mass matters and will matters. But, you know, I am ultimately, you know, you'd be surprised to hear for a spy, a very ideological person, and I do believe in the intrinsic superiority of systems that trust their people and are prepared to distribute power accordingly. And surely that's why Ukraine has been so brilliant. You know, they have trusted their own people, dispersed power, often actually at the point of a gun, literally, and innovated like hell. And the way in which they've used that advantage has been nothing short of inspirational. Now, the reason I want to, you know, put down the Kool-Aid is at the end of the day, Russia has got more men and more artillery, and that is a very significant advantage. Ukraine needs to address its mobilization issues, and we as Europe more broadly need to massively step up our armament production capability. But where the edge comes is in an order of magnitude improvement in precision, the creation of attritable systems, exquisite intelligence, all of which allows you to use scarce resources much, much more effectively against a blundering machine that has zero respect for human life and absolutely no capacity scientifically to focus its effort. And when you combine that with the financial and economic power of Europe, you get a pretty formidable outcome. And I think it's important, you know, that we don't overstate Russian capabilities here. We in the intelligence community we're incredibly clever in predicting when that Putin was going to invade Ukraine, but we absolutely fell into the autocracy trap, just like everyone else, assuming that these big armies that look good on parade hadn't been rotted from within by the corruption that's endemic to an autocratic regime. And so it proved in Russia. And by the way, I think this is quite important also in the context of China.
Let's just kind of shift, if we can, also to a really big issue, which is China. And you've seen this alliance, if you will. Some call it an alliance. Some say that's too strong of a word. This new relationship between China and Russia. And I wonder how you feel about that. And then long term, over the next 4 years, I mean, you think that President Trump in his first term was right to really focus on China. What do you think is going to be critical in the next 4 years in order to sort of keep Chinese aspirations in check? Isn't the right phrase, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I agree. No, I think Trump again. His prescription's spot on. His diagnosis is, I think, wrong. So his prescription is that China, essentially, the admission of China into the global trading system was a mistake because China isn't a market economy, and has basically through a set of sort of subsidies and other measures utterly distorted its relationship in its favour. And by the way, weirdly, also very much at the expense of China's citizens, because there is massive financial suppression in China, all in pursuit of huge surpluses and Xi's absolute determination to focus on production and high technology in a way that augments China's security. This is all about his vision of China as a fortress. And we've got to call that out because those imbalances are killing us. And ultimately, they're creating huge distortions in our own economies and now, in fact, in our own politics. I agree with him wholeheartedly on all of that. I think his obsession with the trade deficit is just bizarre, frankly. So, he can do that if he wants, but it's not going to affect the national security position. And by the way, ultimately, it won't even affect the trade deficit. But the baby I really don't want him to see him throw out with the bathwater is the imperfect but useful progress that the last administration made on technology. Because can we be clear, the thing that will dictate the choices my kids have relative to the ones that I've enjoyed are kind of who owns the digital commons of the world, hardware and software. And Xi Jinping knows this really well. In fact, he knows that his only chance of controlling China and maintaining his dictatorship is his continued ability to master the digital and other worlds. It's existential for him. The Made in China strategy, which is basically working, is Xi's way of resolving this great contradiction that he has between growing the economy and asserting Communist Party control. We've got to stop making life easy for him on that point. Now, the CHIPS Act was imperfect. The IRA was highly imperfect. My bid to Donald Trump would be nonetheless to realize that technology remains the vital ground. And alongside that, as I think I've already said, to recognize that China's play as a rather sort of sophisticated sort of drug dealer style ploy is to make other countries fundamentally dependent on its economy and its economic model. And if you go around doing economy first and whacking tariffs on everyone, you're just pushing them into the bosom of China, which I regard as highly counterproductive. So, I think his instincts on this are sound. And by the way, it's important for them to talk and for them to try and do deals and understand each other. I think that's great. But I think in the end, the West has got to play to its strengths. China does China first, but the answer to it is all of us together.
As alliances. Alliances first, is that...
Yeah, alliances first. There's a phrase.
Yeah, I like it. Point here. Let me just ask you a final question before I let you go, and I really want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us here. You spent so much of your life within MI6, sort of living in the covert world and understanding, seeing the world. Really, I would think it's fair to say in a different way than most of us who haven't lived that life. What are you most sort of concerned about now, and how are you at peace, understanding what an unstable world this is?
Well, look, I'm a spy. We do tough stuff. We do stuff that you shouldn't do in your private life, etc. And we do it in defence, not only of a set of interests, but a set of principles. And I found that sort of soft power has been incredibly important alongside the hard version. And I found that was something that won widespread respect, including from countries that were sort of ostensibly non-aligned. And unaccountably, we've kind of decided that's not a thing. We've decided that we're weak. We're losing confidence. And I just don't get it, because in the covert world, you see it super clearly. You see that ultimately people are queuing up to work for us, not to work for our opponents. And they're doing that because they attach to the things that we stand for and we want. I think both sides of the political argument bear responsibility here. You know, both sides are somehow conspiring to denigrate the power of what we are and who we are and what we do in their different ways. It's just nonsense. Come down to my world and you will understand very, very quickly how lucky we all are.
Such an excellent point to end the conversation on, and gives us so much to think about as well. Sir Alexander, thank you so much for joining us from the UK this week. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and always great to get your perspective on things. Thank you.
Great to see you. Good luck with it all.